Hello there! So sliders, they're pretty fun, right? There's so much you can do with them. So let's talk about them for a little while. We talked previously about how sliders are made up of an active hit circle and then a passive slider body and tail. Players will usually see and respond to these sliders in these two parts: click and hold and follow. Assuming you're not playing something ridiculous, then following the path should be fairly fluid throughout the whole slider. On low level difficulties, where you can clearly see each slider in time, following the path is easy. So since players have to respond to sliders with some movement, we can apply some rules of flow to it. Linear flow: sharper angles are easier to follow. Circular flow: moving around in a circle feels nice. If you've watched my other videos on flow, that's fairly self-explanatory. It's pretty much the same logic as that, but with a bit less clicking. There are some neat tricks you can do whilst applying this logic too. Take this curve slider. Where should the next object after this be? You actually have a range of options here. You could either follow the slider's visual flow for a smooth pattern, follow circular flow for something a little more jumpy, or you could break circular flow altogether and go in the complete opposite direction for something a little stronger. All of these options are perfectly acceptable. One thing that's different from flow with sliders and circles is that at the end of a slider, you already have momentum leading from the slider's shape, which is why it feels smooth to continue with this momentum with circular flow, either at a sharp angle or with respect to the slider's visual flow. Hold on a second. Slider's visual flow. What the heck am I talking about? Visual flow is placing objects in such a way so that it looks like the entire flow all connects together smoothly. It's not that hard to do. You imagine the curve going beyond the slider and take some tangent of that curve close to, but after, the centre of the slider tail. The closer to the tail, the better it looks. You could put it directly on the curve too, but I don't think it looks as good. It works with sliders though, I guess. The same concept also applies when you're going into sliders, because if you're mapping like this, then what the heck are you doing? Keep in mind you can do other weird things that breaks this if you're consistent. Actually, how does this pattern work anyway? Let's take a look at a replay of a faster, higher level map. You probably saw nothing special there, so let me slow it down a bit. What you're looking at is where the cursor lifts from the slider. The player, Azer in this case, barely travels the full intended length of the slider before preparing to jump to the next. This is called slider leniency, and is made possible by this ring, which, if you paid attention to the tutorial, is called a follow circle. As long as the player is within the follow circle for the duration of the slider, they should clear the whole slider just fine. Humans naturally want to take the path of least resistance, and although its main intention was to make the game less impossible, it does allow for some interesting patterns to appear in maps. Kick sliders are an example of this. If you were to follow the full flow of the sliders, then this would be very uncomfortable to play. However, since the follow circle encompasses most of the slider head, then these can be treated almost the same as circles. The same logic can be applied to repeating and buzz sliders as well. There is still movement though, so don't forget about your flow. By the way, don't use more than one reverse for your typical 1-2 slider. The player usually doesn't have enough time to read the second reverse arrow, and oftentimes they'll just miss. What slider leniency also does though, is it makes this play the same as this, play the same as this. Almost. Which slider you use though should be based on the theme of your map. Pishyfat has you covered on that. The same goes for deciding between visual flow and drop-off flow. Flow is pretty subjective and situational, so make sure you have a reason behind what you're doing with respect to the music. As for slider art, they usually cover slow parts of the music and should have slow slider velocities themselves. There should only be one object on screen at a time, and so, like low-level difficulties, they will be fairly easy to follow. Unless you're Hollow Wings, in which case, do whatever the heck you want.